Okay, good morning. We are doing today Yud Beis Amud Aleph. We're at the bottom of Yud Aleph Amud Beis. As I mentioned, these Amudim are just really chock full, not so much time, but we will do our best to do a little bit. So, um, yeah, the end of Yud Aleph Amud Beis, two dots, says the Gemara, B'Kalev ben Chetzrein Hoyled es Azuva, Isha ve'es Yiriyos, ve'ele baneha Yasher v'Sheba ve'Arden. That's a puzzle there in Divrei Yamim, talking about Kalev. So we're going to spend a bit of time now discussing Kalev Darshan in the pasuk. Says the Gemara, what does it mean? Kalev is the son of Chetzrein, ben Chetzrein ben Yefunahu. Don't we know Kalev is ben Yefuna? That's what we always say, right? When we talk about the Meraglim Pasha Shlach, we say Kalev ben Yefuna. So what do you mean he's ben Chetzrein? So the Gemara says no, his real father is Chetzrein, but he's called Yefuna ben Shepana Me'atzas Meraglim. He's called Yefuna because he turned away from the advice of the Meraglim. So says the Gemara, V'akati ben Kenazu, but don't we know that Kalev is the son of Kenaz? What do we mean that we say he's the son of Kenaz? Tichsev, because it says in Pasuk, Val Yilkida Osniel ben Kenaz, Achi Kalev. The Pasuk tells us in Shaftim that Osniel ben Kenaz went and conquered some area, and Osniel ben Kenaz is defined in the Pasuk as the brother of Kalev. So what do you mean? You're going to say that Kalev is the real son of Chetzrain, but over here you see he's the real son of Kenaz because his brother is Osniel, so they should have the same father. The Gemara says no. Amar Rava Chorgoy de Kenaz Hava. As you turn the page to Beis Amud Aleph, he's like the stepson of Kenaz. In other words, he's the half brother of Osniel, so they share the same mother, but he grew up being reared by a stepfather. That was Kenaz. And the Gemara explains they can have a proof of this. Because you have another pasuk in Yeshua that says, "Vayomer Elov Kali ben Yefune Hakenizi." Pasuk says that Kali ben Yefune is defined as Hakenizi. As Rashi explains, if it was really a ben Kenaz, it would have said Vayomer Elov Kali ben Kenaz, but it doesn't. It says called ben Yefuna Hakanizi. Again, ben Yefuna, we understand why he's called Yefuna, not because he was a little son of Yefuna, but because of the fact that he was Panamatis Meraglim. It was such a defining moment in Kalev's life that he gets to be called like that all the time. But the pasuk is telling us that this Kalev ben Yefuna is Hakanizi. As Rashi notes, that the fact that he's called a Kenizi is because he was Ma'anshe Besa Umigidula Shel Kenaz. He was from that household. And he was like a stepfather to him. He raised him up, so that's why he's known as a Kenizi, but it wasn't actually his father. He was a half brother of Osniel. Continues the pasuk. So he said in the pasuk, Kalev ben Chetzrein Hoyleres Azuva. Right, he gave birth to Azuva. So the Gemara explains Azuva zu Miriam. Azuva, which is like sounds like Azav, like to abandon. That is Miriam, meaning Kalev was married to Miriam, and it's referring to that or hinting to that with her name being Azuva. So it says the Gemara, how's that a hint? V'lama nikra shema Azuva. Why would you refer to somebody in such a, not exactly a blandishment, not exactly a great nickname? You're kind of saying something somewhat negative. Why would you call her that? Says the Gemara, Sha'akol Azuva mitchilasa, because everyone abandoned her initially. Rashi explains, "Va'azuva she'azuva I'm sorry, Va'azuva she'azvua kol bachure Yisrael milisa isa." Everyone abandoned her. No one wanted to marry her. Why? So Rashi explains, "Shemitchilasa chaylanis isa." She was ill. She was sickly. She was not very attractive to most people. Continues the Gemara. Hoylid, right? The next word there in the pasuk is the word Hoylid, right? B'chalid ben Chetzrin Hoylid as Azuva. The Gemara is asking, what do you mean? If you're saying Azuva is Miriam, and you're saying that Kalev was married to Miriam, then what do you mean he gave birth to Miriam? That doesn't make any sense. Why would you say B'chalid ben Chetzrin Hoylid as Azuva? It should say Kalev ben Chetzrin was nasa her. Says the Gemara Hoylid, V'aloi minsav havin nasa. Didn't he marry her? Am Rabbi Yechon Kol Noisa Isha L'Shem Shamayim. Anybody marries a woman, appropriate reasons, right? Then it's as though he gave birth to her. So of course, everyone is familiar with the fact that the Chazal were they were not unaware of the reasons that people get married. If you look there in Maseches Derech Eretz Zuta, I think it's very good maybe, it gives us all the different reasons of why people get married. Some people get married because of the beauty of the woman. Some people get married because of her family. Some people get married because of her money. Some people get married, all types of reasons that people get married. But many of them are not appropriate, right? Like we bring down Shulchan Aruch about marrying people for money and marrying people for the wrong reasons. It's not to say that the people who have those benefits going for them that they don't try to, show off what those assets are. That we learned we had in Tainus. The Mishnah told us in the last parak, and we had in the Gemara on Lamed Aleph there in Tainus, right? That the pretty ones would go out there with the bichalis b'kram, and they would say, "Tanu enaf eliyofi." Why kain ish el eliyofi, right? And the ones who were from Yichus the Mishbrachas would say, "Tanu." Right, Tanu enechem mishbracha. Why? Because ein ish el labanim. And the ones who are ugly, so the Gemara adds in one line to the Mishnah, wasn't there in the Mishnah. The Gemara says that the ones who would say who were not comely, they were homely. Right? They were not wealthy, they were poor. And what would they say? They would say, Sheker achein v'havalayefi. Ubelvad, and this is what the Gemara adds, Shekeshuta, right? You should give her jewelry. Because if you give somebody jewelry, you make them beautify them, and even the people who are the weakest in terms of their looks and all the like could end up coming out beautiful. Yeah. Finish the Gemara. Yeriais. The next words there in the pasuk, right? He was giving birth to Azuva. The pasuk said, Isha ve'es Yeriais. Right? Who was Yeriais? So the Mardarshans, Yeriais shahayu paneha daimin liyeriais. Her face was comparable to a curtain. Rashi explains, "B'litayr admamiyais." Right? She was sallow. There was no rosy complexion. She was just very, very sallow. Yeah. Finish the Gemara. The pasuk said the next words were ve'elu banah. These were her children. You're right. Yashar, Shoivav, and Arden. So the Gemara explains, ve'elu banah, al tikri banah, el bainah wasn't reference to children, right? On a pshat level, sure, but on a midrashic level, what we want to say here is that this is a sort of a euphemism, and that to her husband. In other words, this is another reference to Kalev, right? I'll take your now. Don't say it's her sons, but the one who built her, as Rashi explains. Elu Shmais Baila. The next children are going to be mentioned. Yasha Sheva V'Ardain. Sorry, it's not V'Ardain. It's Ardain, right? Right. It's like big son of Vaseresh, right? Seresh's name was Seresh, not Vaseresh. Everybody thinks about him as and Seresh, yeah. So if you look at Rashi, Rashi says, what does it mean? Banel is Boinel. Elu Shmois Baila. These are really the names of her husband, Shev Benah, that he built her. And he made her Mi Baina Akashar Nashim Benisun. Because he married her, he made her like all the other women when he got married to her. And that these sons are going to be all references to Kalev. Yeah, Velu Banel, I'll take your Banel. Banel, Yashar, one son was Yashar. Why? Yishar es Atzmai. Right? Because he made himself straight and didn't fall into the sins of the Meraglim. Shoivav, Sheshiva Yisrael, right? That he was able to protect himself from following the bad advice of the Meraglim. Va'arden, Sherada es Yitzray, that he was able to control over his Yitzar again, that he didn't fall into the sins of the Meraglim. Just point out, we're going to have here in Sotah. We don't have time to go through it today, but we have talked about this Gemara in the past. So we'll talk about it again in Mishnah when we get there. On Lamed Daled on the Bays, right? The Gemara tells us they're based upon the pasuk. The pasuk of Vaya'alu Negev Vayavoyad Chevrain. Right? They came up the Meraglim from the south, and they got to Chevron. The Gemara explains, what do you mean Vaya'alu Negev Vayavoyad Chevrain? Right? Vaya'alu is the mashmayas that what? They got to Chevron, which is all the spies. But by Avoyad Chevron is singular. Only one got to Chevron. If you're saying that it was all the spies, then it should have happened with plural. So why did it say Vayavoy? because Kaleb went and davened alone in Chevron. He went to the Mars Machpelah, Mishutateach al Kibbutz Avis. So that Gemara shows you another way that Kaleb was able to vanquish the spies. How did he manage to do that? He did that because of this going to the cave of Avis. Okay, continues the Gemara. So where we are up to right now, yeah, V'ikad Amri. So V'ikad Amri, another way of explaining what means V'ardain. V'ikad Amri, Ashahayu Poneha Daimon Leveret. His face, or as the Yavitz says, based on Marsha, that it shouldn't say Paneh, it should say Panab. His, because it's talking all about Kalev. So his face became like a rose. So what do we mean? Basically, what we're saying is this. One, he got Miriam, when he married Miriam, Azuva, and he, made her all normal, etc. So he is as though he's getting credit by putting in from a sallow face to a rosy complexion. So he gets known as a Vered, as a rose. Again, he's getting credit for building her. Interesting, the Gemara says the boy now he's being called her builder, but the actual names of Yashar and Shovav and Va'ardan, according to the first way, have nothing to do with her. They're all about the Meraglim and how he beats out. Only the La'ikad Amri gives you a connection to her. So it's a little bit of an odd thing to say, by now he built her, and he built her by all this incredible actions that he did to marry her. Presumably, she was sallow, she was ugly, she was sickly, she had no suitors. But instead, the Gemara is connecting it to the Meraglim. Again, not 100% clear, but from the Ikeda Amri, which is saying that he built her to make her look good and all that would make sense. Okay. Yeah. So now the next pasuk there in Divrei Yamim that we're going to be focusing on is also thought to be a connection to Kalev, even though it's not necessarily so obvious from the pasuk. Ula achshar avit tekaya hayu shtei nashim chala v'naira. Right. So some guy named Ashkar, and he was the father of Tekaya, and he had two wives, Chala and Naira. Now the Gemara is going to dash this totally differently than what we see over here. Says the Gemara, Ashkar. What does it mean, Ashkar? Zek Kalev. Ashkar is a reference to Kalev. V'lomanikra shemay Ashkar shehushru panav b'tainiyos. Right? Why is he called Ashkar? Because of the fact that his face became blackened with fasting. Why was he fasting so much? As Rashi explains, because of the fact he's trying to save himself from the advice of the Meraglim. Right. So as I showed you later on, we're going to see he goes to Chevron, and over here we see all the things that he's been. But fundamentally, he had to include a lot of fasting in his days in order to be able to avoid the atas of the Meraglim. I should just note that from the Gemara, it would sound like when was he fasting to avoid the advice to avoid the Meraglim before he went on the trip? Or is he fasting while he's on the trip? Not 100% clear. Presumably, he was. If you want to say that he knew about the trip and how bad it would go beforehand, okay. But let's assume that he didn't. So it means he was fasting while he was touring, which is not necessarily the easiest thing to do. But in any event, that's why it's called Ashvar. Continues the pasuk. So the pasuk said Avi. So the Gemara darshans Shanasa Lo Ka'av. What does it mean, Avi? That he became like a father, right? In other words, because of the fact that he married a sickly woman, Miriam, he had to be like a father to be misasik, refuas, and mizainis, all the things that a sick person needs in order to be able to get better, right? So the pasuk says he was the father of Tekaya, Shetakas libur of Shabashamayim. He attached himself to his father in heaven. Again, by davening and the likes, so that they shouldn't fall into the trap of the Meraglim. Right. Remember, Moshe Rabbeinu gave a special saving to a special way to save Yehoshua. Right? He called him Yehoshua instead of Hoshea. He gave him a special yud to help protect him. His name himself, right? Yehoshua means to save, but Kaleb didn't have such protections. So he was a self-made person in this regard. He was constantly davening, he's fasting, all the like, in order to be safe from the Atzas Meraglim. Hayushtei Nashim, he had two wives. So what does it mean he had two wives? Nasa Miriam kishtei nashim, Chala v'Naira. right? So the pasuk tells us that this Ashka, who we think is now Kalev on a drash level, we're saying that he had two wives, Chala and Naira. So the Gemara is explaining that these two wives is really Miriam. It's not two women; it's actually one wife. And why is she called Chala? Because initially she was sick, and later on she becomes better. So she's called Naira. Says the Gemara, "Hayishtei nashim nasim Miriam kishtei nashim Chala v'Naira. Lo Chala v'Naira havai." She wasn't. It wasn't. Two different people. One person, al b'tchila chala, al b'seir b'naira. In the beginning, she was sick, and then in the end, she got better. That's why it sort of makes it out as though it was two people. Continues the pasuk over there in Divrei Yamim and says, "Uvenei chala tsaras v'tsoyar ve'esnan." So Chala had three children, Tsaras, Tsayar, and Esnan. So the more explain what does it mean? Tsaras shenas is tsar l'chaversel. Why is she called Tsaras? Because she gave tsaras to all of her friends. In other words, they were so jealous after Miriam became beautiful that they all were very jealous of her beauty. So that's what it means, tsaras. Right? Soihar, what does it mean, Soihar? Right? Soihar Tasel Teva, what does it mean? So Shali Pana Demikatsarayim, she was so alive, she was so vibrant that her face was shining like the afternoon, right? In the middle of the afternoon is when the sun is the highest. So that is the kind of a look that she had. And Esnan, Shekol Haroya Isa Moilech Esnan Le'ishtoi. And everybody who saw her would go bring a present to his wife. As Rashi explains, because she was so beautiful, all the men that would see her would be very interested, and so would go home and give a present to their wife. That's what the Gemara says here in your base. I should point out because last time when I said this, it was on the video, and I don't know if anybody saw it. So I'll tell you what I pointed out over here on Ches Lamed Aleph, which I think is a fantastic vart. The Gemara told us that Rava, from the bottom of Ches Lamed Aleph, read 4 lines up. The Gemara said Rava taught the Ein Yetzer Hara Sheilet El B'Mash Ein of Rayos. The Rava taught that the Yetzer Hara is not Sheilet unless your eye sees it. In other words, that was there to explain if why we would not be having a chash of people, potentially going after the Sotah, right? Maybe they will be excited, right? The Gemara explains that because by the Sotah we have to be worried that maybe there's going to be a chash of herhor, because the Pirchei Guna saw her, in a state of undress, and then they're not going to leave her alone. And what was the whole point of the Sotah? Is because she had problems with men that weren't her husband. So now you're going to exacerbate that. They're going to see her in a state of undress, and they're going to hack her for the rest of her life. But the Gemara says you're not going to have that problem when it comes to somebody's getting killed. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you don't have to be chayshish there for her because the woman's going to get killed. She's not coming outside of that thing alive. So she could be in a state of undress and you don't have to worry about it. So the Gemara says, well, 1 second. Maybe it's going to come out that you could have interest than in others. Just because this woman is dead, that maybe that's going to push you in inappropriate ways to others. Right? As Rashi says, like they sharo as zu aruma mizgara yitzram nashim. Right? They're going to have problems with the taiva when it comes to other women. So the Gemara says no. Rava gemiri de ein yitzahara shoylet el b'masha ein avrayis. Rava taught us that the yitzahara is only shoylet on what your eye sees. So you're only going to be attracted to that woman. You're not going to be attracted to anybody else. That is Rava's big yesod. The problem is, I'm flabbergasted by this Gemara and the fact that nobody says that this is clearly not true. It cannot be. Why not? Because the Gemara tells us in Ksuba Samachay, we discussed not this Gemara before per se, but other Gemaras there on Samachay, but about the wine, Abaya. Remember in Tainus we said it's because of Abaya that Gehanim are allowed to drink wine today. They're on Ches because really Rebbe had said that maybe the Beis Hamikdash is going to be built today. Gehanim drink wine. They maybe needed to serve today. So Rebbe came along and said, no, it's okay. It's all right. So Abaya says, Abaya was a kain himself, says, Kahanim are only allowed to drink wine thanks to Rebbe. So the woman came in, Abaya's wife, her name was Chayma. After Abaya died, and she said she wanted wine. And Rava was in the court, and Rava was like, no. Remember, because we had the more in the end of Brachas that Abaya dies before Rava, right? Remember the different dreams with Barhedya, the whole Gemara there, and then on the base. So, so the Gemara ends up saying over there that Rava was going to outlive Abaya, which he did. So at the courthouse that day, Chaima picks up her arm, shows Rava how much wine that Abai used to give her. He gave her so much wine, and she went like this, and her sleeve came up, and her whole shining skin. Like Rava runs home, and he's tava to Basar Chizda in the middle of the day. So she says, "What happened? My high, who came to court today?" Says Chaima came. So she goes and runs Chaima out of town, the daughter of Chizda. Not getting more into that, other than to say this is Rava, who how could Rava say Gemir the Ein Yitzhar Shel El Mashain of Reyes when we literally have the Gemara's own edus that it wasn't the case. So on the side of the Gemara here in Chesam Nalf, if you look at the Gemara says B'Sanhedrin Isa Rabba. Rabba, change the gears of the Rabba. Now, what I love about the sides of the Gemara and all of the Rishonim, especially before printing, was that they had to be very condensed. So it doesn't explain to you why they changed the gears to the Rabbah, but maybe it's because they were bothered by the same question that I just mentioned to you now. In any event, here you see another raya, right? Shekol haraya, I said anybody who saw Miriam was so attracted to her, moiled estan leishtai. What do you mean? What would have any relevance to his wife, his own wife? No, you see that there could be after effects. Okay, continues the Gemara. Right, right? Pari commanded his people. What did he command them? I'm Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina. Af al Amay Gazer. He also was Gazer on his people that they're going to have to be killing their kids. In other words, the pasuk says that he commanded his whole nation. Why did he have to? Why did he have to do that? So Rabbi Yossi is saying Af al Amay, even on his nation. Again, the reason is, as Rashi explains here from the Tanchuma, is because when Moshe Rabbeinu was being born, the Stagnine Pari, the astrologers told him, we don't know if the Mashiach Shal Yisrael, who's being born now, is from a Jews or from the Egyptians. We can't tell. So therefore, he's mikabetz everybody together and said everybody who was born on that day has to be thrown into the river, right? If you look at the pasuk says, all the children, meaning even the Egyptian children. Why? Because they weren't sure. They weren't sure if he was a Jew or an Egyptian. Yeah. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina, Af al Amay Gaza. He was even gazing this on his people. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina, Shalish Gezeres Gaza B'tchila. Right, Pari did 3 Gezeres at the beginning. First is Im Bein Hulam say. First of all, if there was a Jewish child that was born, then kill him. And in that, he was trusting the Mialdes, as we already explained yesterday, right? Shifra and Pua, right? He basically relied on them to do the job for him. He wasn't killing them. He wasn't having Egyptians kill him. He was having Jewish Mialdes kill Jewish boys. However, when that didn't work, because they were Chayesena, so then what does it do? And you have to change the gears here. So then after that, he said, okay, we got to throw them into the Nile. But who is being thrown into the Nile? Just the Jewish kids. But he's using Shemim for that. And then he's not trusting the Mialdis anymore. Now he's having Egyptian policemen do the job. And in the end, Afal Amay Gaza, right? And the end, like I said, from the words "kol ben and from the fact that he says "l'chol amay lemor," it's clear that the gezerah was applicable not only to the Jewish children but also to the non-Jewish children, boys who were born, and presumably he had policemen, etc., there to enforce the rules. I should just point out that as a pshat matter, in other words, the Stagnine Para had a good reason not to know who Moshe Rabbeinu was, because the stars, or whatever it is they used, would be veritably confused. But Moshe Rabbeinu is a genetically Jewish child, but he's growing up in an Egyptian home. He's growing up in the house of Pharaoh. And I'll tell you more. and I don't really have time to go into major detail on it, but if you look in the beginning of Sefer Shemais, there is a light vort. Leitwort is a term coined by German Bible scholars in Hebrew, modern Hebrew today, in the Herzog and those places that study the Tanakh. They call it a mila mancha. A light word is a mila mancha, meaning it's a word that appears many times in a condensed space. Right? In the Torah, we don't have prakim. Prakim are from the Christians. In the Torah, we have this geographical space called parshiot. Right? We have a parsha stuma, parsha psuk. We have different ways that the Torah geographically shows us that something is connected or something is not connected, right? So, for example, in Parshas Vayetze, you have a whole parsha with no stumas. There's just no, I forget psuchas, there's no stumas. So you have to darshan that parsha as one story, right? The same as the story, let's say in Parshas Balak, right? Until you get to Bnei Ismael, the whole parsha is one thing. There's no breaks. Why would there be no breaks? So I'm not getting into more other than to say that if you look in the beginning of Parshas Shemais, there is, after the discussion of Yaakov coming down to Mitzrayim, etc., you'll see that there is a whole parsha that starts out that Vayelech Ish in Beis Levi, Kachas Bas Levi, and you will see there that the word Ish is used 8 times in a very condensed space. Why was it necessary to have the word Ish so many times, an undefined person? I believe it's because of an Ibn Ezra. The Ibn Ezra beautifully says that when Moshe Rabbeinu was getting older, so the pasuk says, "Vayigdal Moshe vayetze elecha vayar b'sivleisam vayar ish mitzri makeh ish ivri me'echav." There's a couple of the ishes right there, and over there says the Ibn Ezra. Look at the pasuk. The pasuk Vayigdal Moshe vayetze elecha vayar b'sivleisam vayar ish mitzri makeh ish ivri me'echav. The first time it says that he went out, it doesn't define who the echav are. He doesn't know if his echav are Jews or Egyptians. When he goes out, he's an Egyptian person, genetically a Jew, and he doesn't know who his brothers actually are. But in the course of watching the way the Egyptians treated the Jews, he decides he's putting his lot with the Jews, and that's what the pasuk later on defines it as. Vayar b'sivloisam, vayar ish mitzri, makeh ish ivri me'echav. Now it defines who the echav are. He's now on the side of the Jews. And in that one pasuk, you have an entire debate within Moses' mind as to who he's going to be. Yeah, but that would explain why the Stagnine Pare are so confused about everything. Continues the Gemara, Vayelech ish mi beis Levi, vayikachas bas Levi. So the Gemara says, Lahechan halach. Where did he go? I'm Rabbi Yehuda bar Zvina, shehalach ba'atzas bita. He was following the advice of his daughter. What do you mean? Tana says the Gemara, Amram gadol hadar haya. Amram was the gadol hadar. Right? And how is the Amram the gadol hadar? What's the proof of it? We don't 100% know what the proof is, but the Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchos Malachim Parak Test, the Rambam writes that Amram was the leader of the Jews, and he gave them various different commands, even more than the Shemesh B'nai Noach. The Kesef Mishnah over there writes, I don't know what the source of the Rambam is. Maybe the source is right here. The Gemara felt that he was the Gadol Hador. How do you know as a matter of pshat that Amram was the Gadol Hador? Not 100% clear, but I have an idea. My idea is that my idea is not based, I'm taking it out of the Midrashic context. So I have no indication that Levi is the leader of the brothers. I do know, of course, that Yehuda is to be a leader. But what I do know is this, that if you look in the end of Parashat Shemais, the Pasuk tells us in the end of Parashat Shemais that Hashem tells Aaron to go meet Moshe, and he brings him back. And they're gathered in all the elders to listen to Moshe Rabbeinu's signs that he got from Hashem at Har Chayret. Everybody got together. Now, I'm a mechilas part of myself. If I stood up tomorrow and I said, I want all the Jews in, I don't know, Passaic, everybody should get together. I have something to tell you. God came to me. Like, it'll be a Looney Tune. Okay, he's got to go to the loony bin. Who's going to come and gather together? Because I heard the word of God. Who's coming? But if, let's say, Rabbi Stern, right? If the Rosh Yeshiva in Passaic said, I have a special message, I want everybody to come together. You'll have a lot of people would come. Why? Because he has attained a level of chashivas in the community that everybody's going to come and listen to what he has to say. If everybody's coming to Aaron and there's no seeming any challenge, everybody's coming to listen. All the Zakana, everybody's coming to hear what Aaron has to say. It's because he's the leader. Well, how did Aaron become the leader? Presumably his own father was the leader. That's as a matter of pshat, to try to explain how we know that Aaron was the Gadol Hadar. I have no proof of it, but that's my thesis. Okay, continues the Gemara. So once Pari Kavan, Sha'amar Pari, once Pari said, Harasha, once he said that all the children should be thrown into the river, Amri L'shav Anu Amelin, he says, oh, we're just wasting our time here by being married and having children. So Amar Vigirish is Ishtai, the Kulam Vigirish is Nishasan. So they all got divorced, they all followed Amram because he's a Gadadar. Amra Loy Bitai. So his daughter said, Abba Kashik Zerascha, Yais Mishal Pari. She said, Dad, your Xeris are worse than Pharaoh, right? Remember the Haggadah over here? Shapar like Gazer Allah Zakarim, right? And who does the Haggadah talk about? Lava, right? But Va'ata Gazarta Allah Zakarim Ba'ala Nekevis. Pharaoh's decree is limited. He's not coming to hurt the girls. He just make sure that there's not going to be any Mashiach Yisrael that's going to be born. But you, Amram, by separating from your wife, you can't even have any daughters. So you're even worse. Paralel goes to Paris only goes to Al meaning he's taking away Al these boys that he's killing. But you're preventing people from getting to Al Haba. Why? Because if they can never be born, forget be killed, if they can never be born, then they cannot be deserving, as Rashi knows, of Al Haba. Right, you're a tzaddik, for sure your gezerah is going to work. In Paris, we have no idea. He's a Russian, maybe not. Right? So says the Gemara, he went and returned his wife, who's Machzik Rushasai, Amdu Kulan Vefzir Esnashay, and therefore all the Jews went and followed and brought back their wives. They were all Machzik Rushasai, and they all got remarried. Says the pasuk, says the Gemara, I'm sorry, Vayikach. Why does the pasuk say Vayelech Ishim Beis Levi Vayikach as Bas Levi? Vayachzar Mibayle. Should have said that he returned his wife. What do you mean he went and married her? So Amar Rabbi Yehuda bar Zvina she'asla ma'aseh likuchen, because he treated her the second marriage as though he was married for the first time. He was very excited about it. Shiva bar Piryain, right? He sat her in a very nice chair. The Aaron and Miriam meraked on the fanel, and Aaron and Miriam were dancing in front of her because they were all born. Obviously, they were older than him, than Moshe Rabbeinu. Malach Hasharas Amru Ema Banim Semecham, and the Malach Hasharas said, "Oh, the mother of the children is very happy." So I want to just mention a minute over here on the idea of being Masig Rishase. Is Masig Rishase a mitzvah or not a mitzvah? The Machlekes in the Pesachim, the Pashbates in Kela Gimel Tim Tes says V'yesh mitzvah l'haksig Rishase. And the Charles Shus of the Radbaz in Chel Ches Kuf Nun Gimel says that I don't see in Masig Rishase that it's a mitzvah at all. But you could do it. And there's sort of a lot of different people on both sides of the debate. Is Masig Rishase a mitzvah or not? But one of the strong indications that being Masig Rishase is a mitzvah is that we say that when the first marriage fails, so the mizbeach is being shedding tears, and so you wanted to stop shedding tears, so you're Masig Rishase. The Yerushalmi talks about a ma'aser there. Rabbi Yosef Glida had a terrible wife. When he got divorced, nevertheless, and she got remarried, nevertheless, he was still chas on her because when the pasuk says, "Don't ignore your flesh," that's even on your gerusha. So this story over here about Amram being Masig Rishas is very interesting because what it doesn't say is one of the days here in Chazal. One of the days in Chazal is the Targum Yenissim and Azil. You're going to Targum Yenissim and Azil in Parshas Ba'alaischa. The pasuk there tells us about Eldon and Medan, and the pasuk says that Eldon and Medan were mistam b'machana, and that was potentially going to be a threat to Moshe Rabbeinu. But the Targum Yonason says that it's even more juicy than that. Says the Targum Yonason that V'shtayu v'trei guvim b'mashrisa shmei dechad Eldon shmei detznean Medan b'noy del tzafim b'mparnach. The Eldon and Medan were the sons of Elitzaph ben Parnach. They laid us Yecheved Bras Levi. The Yecheved, the daughter of Levi, got married to Elitzaph ben Parnach. Bisman de Patra Amram Gavra, when her husband divorced her. Visnavis Lei, and she married him ad the latest estimation before Moshe Rabbeinu was born. So according to this, Targum Yonason, the period of time that Amram and Yecheved were separated was very decent. a decent period of time, because she went out and married somebody else called Elizabeth Parnach. She had two sons, Eldon and Medan. In which case, what would be the problem? He's not being Machzir Rishasi. It's this week's parsha. Parsha says we have to bring in the parsha. Right? What does the pasuk say? Lo yichal bala rishain asher shilcha losha lekachta lias leisha. Why acharei asher tamah? Once she gets married to somebody else, you can't Machzir Rishasi. It's a lot. Machzir Rishasi may be a mitzvah, but only if she hasn't married somebody else. Whether this Targum medicine is to be understood as pshat, I'm not saying. I'm just saying this is what the Targum medicine says. I should point out that the Das Kam, the Bali Tosfos, doesn't agree with this. The Das Kam, the Bali Tosfos, says that Yecheved eventually does get divorced from Amram. When is that? She gets divorced from Amram in after Mount Torah. Because after Mount Torah is Daidasai. So then she's Aser. So he got divorced from her after Mount Torah, and then he got remarried to somebody else, and then he had Eldon and Medan. So either way, both Dasakan and the Targum Medicine want to connect Eldon and Medan to Moshe, which makes the challenge of Eldon and Medan's divorce even more delicious if they are really half brothers of Moshe, whether from Yocheved or from Amram. And the Dasakan, he continues, and then he says that he heard that he found some sort of a kunchis from a guy Hillel in Eretz Yisrael. Ani Hillel, Ra'isi Kever Eldad and Medad. I saw their kever in Israel. V'haya kasav aleim Eldad and Medad Achi Aaron min ha'av v'loy min ha'im. That's what it said it on the kever. Don't know. All right, we got to move. So yeah, so where are we up to? So the Gemara told us that and by as a pshat level, the idea that Amram and Yocheved had separated is potentially seen as a matter of pshat, because if you look at the pasuk says v'yelech ishim beis Levi, v'yikach es bas Levi. What do you mean? Aaron and Miriam are for sure older than baby Moshe. Right? Even though in one place of Chumash it says Miriam later, but Miriam for sure has to be older. How could otherwise she'd be watching over him? So what do you mean Bas Levi, and then you talk about the baby Moshe? Now you could be eliding and just not covering the birth of the other two. That's a possibility. That is for sure a possibility. But as a matter of pshat, if you want to say that Aaron and Miriam, given that they're already born, and you're saying that it sounds like now he's getting married, that maybe as a pshat matter, it sounds like maybe there was a separation. Right? That could be. That could be where this was seen as a matter of just simple pshat. Yeah. Okay, continues the Gemara. Yeah. We are up to Malachi Asharis Amru and as Bas Levi. So he took the Bas Levi. Efsher Bas Meir Shloshim Shana Havia Bekorle Bas, when she's 130 years old and she's called a Bas. Again, she was born by the walls of Egypt, right? Because you go there in the end of Vayigash, you'll see that it counts 70 people came down. But you only count 69. So if you have 70 and the math doesn't work, so how do you get it? It was not Shenemar. She was born in Egypt, but her pregnancy was not in Egypt. I have to say it because I have to say it. So this is a fantastic topic. There's a huge machlokes between the Ramban and the Ibn Ezra there by Yigash Shmais. The Ramban holds that the Ibn Ezra is 100% wrong. That the Ibn Ezra says that Yocheved was not 130 years old. She was, however old she was. She was an aunt of Moshe, sure, an aunt of Amram. Okay, no problem with that. But she was not 130 years old because that's such a big name. That's even bigger name than Sarah was 90. The Torah would have recorded it. Says the Ramban. The Torah is not a Guinness World Book of Records. It doesn't quote every miracle. That's the famous machlokes between those two. But I am a simple man, and I like Pashup Pshat. And to me, the most favorite commentary on this topic is the Rush. In the end of Psachim, we look at the Rush over there. The Rush says the Torah sometimes rounds off. And the Rush gives a lot of different examples. One of them is right there in Parshas Vayigash, where we say we have 70 people, and says the Rush, it's 70 because it's 69. Just round it up. Nothing this year. And in which case then, Yocheved could be not 130 years old. But this Gemara is going with the idea that she was very old. Says the Gemara, yeah. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Shenolda Bas Simani Nairis, right? That Yocheved became like a young person. But Tara Shavat Bain, right? The next words in the pasuk over there was that she became pregnant. She gave birth to a son. Says the Gemara, "Baha Habis me Ibro Bay close to Yarchim Mekar." When she's already pregnant by 3 months, we're going to see in the Gemara, and I don't think we're not going to have time today to do it. Yeah, so we'll have to do it. I'll explain more tomorrow about what I mean on this. So I'm reviewing the Barzvina, what do we mean when we say that she was already pregnant 3 months? So we say that her Leda was like her becoming pregnant. Just like women become pregnant, they don't have much tsar. Unlike most women, she had no tsar when she gave birth. Right? Just that proves the Nashim Tzidkaniyas don't have the curse that Chava got. Yeah. So, and we really have to stop over here. Okay. All right, we'll finish tomorrow.